Usually about just a couple times before the student total dissolves all.
I can't hear you on this slide.
I'm sorry, I'll leave this way, but I'll talk to you. Her question about how many times we can reuse the water per frac job, it's really only a couple of times. It is to the point up here, every well's a little different, but we can probably get 5 or 7 times out of that water before we have to add more to it. And then it's sort of an ongoing process. You clean it up, you add a little, you clean it up, you add a little. So you could probably get somewhere a couple times out of it before it just isn't very good anymore. If that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions or comments before we move on to the next segment? Yes, ma'am.
How come total dissolved solids? What does he consider, what are total dissolved solids? I mean, I know it's like minerals.
Yeah, it's exactly right. It can be anything from rock chunks to minerals to different things that are found underground. It's not so much bacteria or organism, it's mostly just rocks, sand, things like that. Things that come up with the water when you actually are done with the frac job.
Yes, ma'am.
How is it that Muskegon Water District can sell their water at such a low price when our drinking waters tend to go up and up and up if we're in a city or village sewer system?
That is a long and involved topic. And there are folks that are working, trying to work with the Conservancy Court and work with the Muskingum Watershed Conservancy District officials. We could hold a whole forum around that, and maybe we will, since we are within the MWCD district. But there is ongoing work with that. The Conservancy Court met recently. They claim that they're selling it at a rate that they would sell to municipalities, because Muskingum does sell to various cities and locales throughout Ohio at a certain rate for them to treat and use for their.
Can that be verified?
Elaine, do you have anything you can add to that? You're
well, I don't know.
one in the room.
I don't know the details of, what they're selling to municipalities.
Information afterwards, ma'am, and I can definitely put you in touch with some folks that are working specifically on that issue. Thank you. I think on that note, thank you very much, Melanie.
Yeah.
Very intensive presentation, thank you. Now we've got Brian Kunkemoeller from the Ohio Sierra Club. Let's give him a warm welcome as well.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for having me, everyone. My name is Brian Kunkemoeller. I grew up on the very edge of the suburbs of Cincinnati, a little area called Pleasant Run. I'm a native Ohioan. I went to University of Cincinnati, studied ecotoxicology and environmental policy. So I stayed home for college, and now I live in Columbus, where I work for the Sierra Club. Quick story, just to lighten the mood a little bit before I get started. I'm an identical twin. Before I was born, my grandfather wanted to name my twin brother and I Frickin' Frack, and he offered my parents $150 to do so at the time. I'm thankful that they did not sign that lease. But I do also like to use that story just to point out that, my grandpa, fracking to my grandpa was just some guy in a TV show. We hear that they've been fracking for 100 years. Well, 100 years ago, fracking meant dropping a stick of dynamite down in a hole and blasting open the rock so you could have a water well. What we're talking about fracking nowadays is two very different things. Mike will talk about the moment where, the horizontal leg, they release the pressure and small explosives and it cracks open the rock. That single moment to him is fracking, but when the rest of us talk about fracking, we're not just talking about that one single moment. We're talking about from the moment the piles of gravel show up on the well pad to the moment that last drop of waste goes to a landfill, or because none of those things would exist if it wasn't for that need for the horizontal drilling. And horizontal drilling really has only been around since about 2005, is where it really started to take off. So what we're talking about nowadays with fracking is not my grandpa's fracking. And if he knew what fracking was going to be like nowadays, he probably would have never made that offer. So I'd just like to tell that story to start things off. And the Sierra Club, how many folks in here are Sierra Club members? Got a few. Melly's even a member. Right. So we have 2.4 million members nationally. We bill ourselves as the nation's oldest, largest, and most influential environmental organization. We were founded by John Muir in 1892 to protect wilderness. Nationally, we have a lot of different campaigns. Our Beyond Coal campaign has been very successful in accelerating the transition from fossil fuels. We know that fossil fuels have been poisoning us for decades, destroying wild places, disrupting local communities. Melanie talked about some of these things, and fossil fuels are obviously the leading cause of climate disruption. And our goal is to move beyond all fossil fuels, including coal, oil, natural gas, because we know that we have to. We're going to run out of these things, and at some point, we're going to, whether it's sooner or later, we're going to realize that, renewable energy is the only way that we can continue to live on a sustainable planet. So that's the overarching goal of the Sierra Club these days. I work for the Ohio chapter, so we are broken down in smaller components. We're a grassroots organization, so we're broken down into chapters, which is mostly states. And then in Ohio, it's broken down even more into 7 local groups. So I guess this would technically be the Central Ohio group, I believe. So we have 7. Also close to here, just to the east, we have the Portage Trail group. A little bit to the north, we have the Northeast Ohio group. Our 2 groups that are seeing the most activity in their areas are the Portage Trail group, which covers Carroll and Columbiana County, and then the Salt Springs group, which is a tiny sliver along the very eastern part of the state. And so the way that we work is all of our members get together in their communities. They do things like going out on outings. They go on Friday night hikes. They just get together and they sit down, and sometimes when they're not going outside, they sit down and talk about these kind of issues. And then things that become important to them then make their way up to us and become important to us. And that's why that's why I was hired 2 years ago, because fracking was becoming a very important issue to our members, and they wanted someone to help advance our policy positions on that. So that's, in a nutshell, what I do. This is our website. If folks are on the web, feel free to check us out. We have lots of resources on our website, ohiosierraclub.org. As Melanie mentioned, one of the things that we also do on the fracking issue in Ohio, we have water sentinels. So some of our members go through little trainings, learn how to do tests for total dissolved solids, and those type of things. And so, monitoring your local watershed is a critical component of what we do. And okay, so now I'll just go ahead and start talking about injection wells. I'm going to cover this a little bit. I don't want to get too technical. I tend to talk a little bit more about how the policy got us here and what it really means and looks like on the ground. So if you have more technical questions, please stop me for a second. But these are really the 3 different kinds of injection wells we have in Ohio. Class 1 is the hazardous material disposal wells. They go much deeper. There's much more stringent requirements on those wells. Those are regulated by the Ohio EPA. The Class 3 wells are typically salt mining operations, and the Class 2 wells, which I'm here to talk about today, those are used for oil and gas waste disposal, and that is regulated by the Ohio DNR. So let me be clear, because I think that a lot of times this gets skipped over. EPA has nothing to do with fracking in Ohio. 1509.02 of the Ohio Revised Code, sole and exclusive authority over oil and gas is by the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. And if anybody is familiar with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, they are probably, well, they are the most controversial state agency in the state right now. And Melanie referred to the communications plan, so I might as well bring that up again. Here we have an agency that is working with the industry. Sorry, Mike, for bringing this up, by the way. But
I think jobs at Ohio is the most controversial right now.
Yeah, you're right.
I see your point, but
So here we have the regulatory agency who's supposed to be regulating drilling in Ohio, working with that very same industry to do a PR campaign to convince Ohioans that we need to be drilling in our state parks and forests and public lands. And, we took some serious issue with that because, well, A, because we don't believe that's how democracy should function, but B, because we were listed as #1 target on their enemies list. And it was a little surprising for us, for just kind of a group of folks that typically just kind of go out on hikes and go explore nature and things like that. So We messaged very strongly on that. We were very disappointed with the governor, and it was nice to see him change his position. And we hope that's a sincere that he's going to keep our public lands off limits from this very industrial process. Slide that you.
No, it's because you're plugged into this one, so you can advance on this one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
I'll let you do it.
So, all right, so why is it that oil and gas waste is not disposed of in Class 1 wells, right? Class 1 wells, they're hazardous waste disposals. Well, in 1996, the federal EPA started to look at whether or not they wanted to classify oil and gas waste as hazardous. And the determination they came to was not that, well, this stuff, it just isn't hazardous, so we don't need to regulate it as such. It was more or less that, well, there's so much of it that it would be impossible for us to regulate as hazardous waste. And then in 2005, a lot of folks are familiar with the Energy Policy Act. That was the Bush and Cheney administration. Basically, I mentioned earlier that if they had to clean the water, it would be too expensive for them to do it. So they fixed that problem with the 2005 Energy Policy Act by exempting oil and gas waste from a lot of key provisions of the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act. And they basically made fracking a profitable process by removing all these type of regulations that they had to follow. And then the other thing I want to talk about is the Safe Drinking Water Act. The reason that the Ohio Department of Natural Resources is able to issue permits for injection wells, Class 2 injection wells, is 1983. They signed an agreement with the United States EPA that delegated the authority to regulate injection wells from the US EPA to the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. And why is that important? Oh wait, I'll get to that in just a second. Let me circle back here. So we know that from some reports, the Endocrine Disruption Exchange, and I have the source down here at the bottom, looked at one instance where there was as much as 700 chemicals in various types of frac fluid. So, like I said, not all frac fluid is the same, and no shales are created equal, so higher concentrations of radionuclides than the others. And then what does it look like in Ohio as far as the disclosure? Like I mentioned, there's voluntary disclosure for the industry on a website called Frac Focus, but they don't have to disclose things that are considered proprietary. So if I'm an industry and I'm trying to decide which of those ones I want to be proprietary, I'm probably not going to disclose the ones that are the most dangerous or most hazardous to human health. And then the testing, I already kind of mentioned that. We kind of have this representative sampling scenario set up where not every single well has to be tested for what's coming back out. It's also not being tracked. I want to point that out too. In Pennsylvania, they require every load of waste to be tracked to where it ends up. In Ohio, we don't do that. So we don't know for sure that all of it is ending up in injection wells. And also, there's starting to crop up these other different ways of disposal. Originally, when Senate Bill 315 passed, the only way you were allowed to dispose of the liquid waste was through injection wells. But now there's been kind of these other, but you can do it this other way too. There's a facility in Warren, Ohio called Patriot Wastewater, or Patriot Water Treatment or something like that. And what they're doing, they're partially treating it, putting it into a sewer to a wastewater treatment plant that continues to partially treat it, and then it's being released into the Mahoning River. Also, something that was snuck through the Ohio budget last year, House Bill 59 that Melanie mentioned, 23 facilities were given permission to operate without even technically a permit. So there was this really interesting clause inserted that with an order by the chief of the ODNR, you could handle and process brine in these really interesting new ways. That made the news earlier this week. On Tuesday, one of those 23 facilities in Belpre, Ohio, called a fire tank, exploded. It blew up, sent three workers to the hospital, and interestingly, just a couple of weeks before that, an Ohio attorney named Terry Lodge sent a letter to the director of the ODNR saying, you need to shut these facilities down, these are hazardous, talking about worker safety and these type of things. So there's some interesting little things going on behind the scenes, and So here, just for kind of a visual, this is about 1 million pounds of fracking chemicals for a single well. So, you'll hear folks say, well, it's less than 1% of all the water that's used. Well, yes, it's millions of gallons of water, but when you add all that up. So something we talk about a lot is Ohio as being the dumping ground. We're on the receiving end of an awful lot of waste. At least half of the waste in Ohio comes from out of state. A large percentage of that is from Pennsylvania. And why is that? And Melanie mentioned some of the geological reasons. I'm not going to say those aren't legit, but I would like to point out that I said that Ohio Department of Natural Resources has that program delegation. They exist under a completely different set of rules than Pennsylvania, which is run by the US EPA. So the US EPA's rules since 1983 have changed a lot. And I would like to also say that the biggest thing that concerns me about those two program differences, in Pennsylvania, you have to have a public hearing, you have to have public notices, you have to let folks know if you're going to be having an injection well in their community. Well, in Ohio, the 1983 agreement got rid of that. So you do not have to have a public hearing or anything along those lines. And also, something that happened under Senate Bill 315, you can no longer appeal an order, a permit issued by the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. And Ohio DNR has even argued that in a recent case in Athens where a well permit was issued and the community tried to appeal, and they argued that, well, you don't have appeal rights, you have no rights as citizens. And so, I think that that's at the core of the issue here is that throughout the legislative process, the way that things have shaken out in the legislature, the citizens are being more and more left out of the process. There's less public participation, and there's also less transparency with this administration. The Ohio Department of Natural Resources, we've had to sue them 3 times just to get public records within a number of months. So it's extremely difficult to actually be able to be participatory in our state, which we believe to be a democracy. So some other ways that it looks really different than Pennsylvania, for example, with these 2 different sets of rules, just to be a little more specific. Permitting, Ohio law requires permit to be approved or denied within 30 days. In Pennsylvania, it could take anywhere between 3 months and a year for the US EPA to issue a permit. So if I'm a driller and I need to get that waste disposed of right away, or if I'm an injection well operator, I want to be able to start doing business right away. I don't want to have to wait 3 months to a year, and I especially don't want to have to face the community and tell them what I'm up to. So the folks are coming here. We have over 200 wells currently accepting waste versus Pennsylvania, I think it's somewhere around 11. Is that about right, Bill?
7 last time.
7? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. And the SDWA is the Safe Drinking Water Act. So that is the program that allows for injection wells. So, and the 1421 is the laws that apply to Ohio. 1425 are the laws that apply to Pennsylvania. So I already brought up the public notice, the comment periods, transparency, appeal rates, enforcement and compliance. I'll get a little bit more into that. Well disposal fees, it's only 5 cents per barrel for in-state operators. It's only 20 cents per barrel for out-of-state operators. It's very, very, very cheap to dispose here. And what states have their own programs? See, so the blue states, they're Pennsylvania, that's a US EPA administered program. The green states are state administered programs. So right now we're pressing for the US EPA to do something about this issue. We believe it's an environmental justice issue. The Bill Clinton administration said, well, we need to have equal rights and access to clean air, clean water, and clean land. So we believe that this regulatory schematic is contrary to that right. And so we're putting a lot of pressure on EPA to force Ohio to have standards at least equal to the 1425 program requirements that Pennsylvania has to apply to. So now we'll talk about enforcement and compliance. These are violations in Ohio. This is our partners, Frac Tracker. They are, between them and Teresa Mills, hunt down more data than anyone else in the state probably about these type of things. And enforcement is not common. So there's a particular issue I also want to highlight with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources under Ohio law, is they are not able to issue fines. Okay, so what they can do is issue basically a notice of violation, which is kind of like a warning letter. If you get, Mike will tell you, well, if they're really bad, then the ODNR can shut them down, so that's the hammer that they have. But you know, it's like if you're driving down, you know, the highway, and I came in on the detour route. What road was that? Was that 36 or something like that? Or no? Yeah, I came in. Yeah. So if I was to get pulled over on my way in, I didn't speed because I didn't want to end up being late. But if I was to get pulled over, instead of getting a ticket, you know, they gave me a warning, and every time I got pulled over, I just get a warning. Well, am I going to probably speed more often? I would probably say so. Now, I don't know if they can take your car away for speeding or not, but you know, you're going to do, it's human nature, you know, you're going to do exactly what you can get away with. And so what this data here is that here we have the number of inspections are going up, but the number of these notice of violations are staying the same. So it doesn't seem to be having a bearing or effect. The only people that can levy fines to bad actors are the state attorney general or the county police department. So the state attorney general has too many other things going on. Arguably things that have nothing to do with them in California and things like that, but their ODNR has stacks of referrals on their desks that just never are acted upon by the state attorney general. Then you have the county police departments, and they don't know about this nuanced law. They don't know how to prosecute it, and you know, they would be up against some really deep-pocketed defendants if they were to try to take them to court. But also, they're busy dealing with things like homicides and you know, heroin, drug addiction, and stuff like that in their county. So they're just not suited to deal with that. So there really is no, you know, real enforcement component to the regulatory schematic in the state. Here's another little statistic. This was from ProPublica. They do some really interesting investigative journalism. The number of wells went up since 2003, 102%, but the number of enforcement actions went down 33%. And again, that was this is right around the time when the regulatory structure was changed. Earthquakes, we've heard a lot about this. ODNR actually did do some decent things about the earthquake issue, but again, it falls patently short of being truly protective. If a well site has a 2.3 or higher earthquake, then they have to do seismic monitoring. That's after the fact. So there's no requirements for having to do, you know, geological surveys in these areas, and the amount of data that they really do have is quite limited. So, in fact, in a lot of the injection well applications, you're supposed to include data about the confining layer above your zone of injection. So geologically, there's an area of injection where the fluids are going into, and then there needs to be a confining layer on top of that that you have to characterize. We've seen again in these injection well permit applications where that data is not included. So it's amazing to me that they would allow an injection well to exist without knowing that there was for sure a confining layer above that zone of injection.
If I'm looking right there, you have a well up and around Sandusky? Is that it really?
This is an ODNR map, and I can't see the date on it. Oh, this is 2012.
I guess I would be concerned because that's where the underground rivers are.
Right.
And
So